Bienvenidos a Tres Respuestas, un espacio de conversación, de diálogo y de propuestas. Nuestro invitado de hoy es un amigo muy especial. Se trata de Ani Dasgupta, el CEO del World Resources Institute, uno de los centros de pensamiento y acción climática más importantes de todo el mundo. Ani es arquitecto, nacido en India, formado en los Estados Unidos, con una larga experiencia en el Banco Mundial, en la banca multilateral, en temas como desarrollo urbano, transformación de ciudades, y después ha hecho una carrera no solamente muy exitosa, sino con un alto reconocimiento internacional, primero como director de ciudades y después como CEO del World Resources Institute. Hoy también Ani Dasgupta es el autor de un libro muy importante que se llama The New Global Possible, donde tenemos que hablar de optimismo y acción climática. Annie, it's such a pleasure to have you in our podcast Tres Respuestas.
Thank you very much for having me, Ivan. I can't wait. This is exciting. Thank you.
Well, I've talked about who you are in terms of what's your professional achievements, and I've talked about your past of your time in the World Bank, where you made a successful career, but also what has been your experience in WRI. But let me ask this question to the person. Who is Sani Dasgupta? Who is Sani, and where were you born? How has been your life, your career? Tell me something about also the your infancy years and your time in the U.S. and how all these experiences have turned you into a global voice for climate action.
Ivan, I grew up in Delhi in a very, very middle class family. My mother was a teacher. My father had a small business. Very middle class. Uh, Important is the part of Delhi where immigrants from rest of the country came. My father was an immigrant from West Bengal, um, and so I grew up there. And if you grew up in Delhi, you cannot avoid abject poverty and abject wealth next to each other. There are fancy buildings and slums literally next to each other. But I was lucky that I grew up with a family. My parents were really ahead of the times, very progressive. And I grew up with two ideas that were central in my family. One was injustice, it was common. My parents would discuss this, and public service. And so you can imagine I grew up in a family where these things were kind of discussed. So when I grew up, I went to architecture school. I was good at drawing. I and I did very well in architecture school. But what the problem that I focused on, that I was really, by the time I graduated, I was not really interested in buildings or fancy buildings. I was interested in slums. Why do slums exist in a city at all with so much wealth? Delhi was growing when I was growing up. It's still growing. With so much wealth, why do slums exist? And that question has pretty much defined the trajectory of my career. Like, why do slums exist? So I worked for an NGO on housing for a few years in Delhi, but then I wanted to learn more. And there was a very particular program at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on this question of affordable housing in cities. And when I came to MIT, I discovered very soon development studies, how countries grow and things. And I got very interested in that. And I thought I wanted to be a professor and teach. So I joined a PhD program. And I was in MIT. The best thing that happened there was I met my wife, Elizabeth, whom you have met. So that itself is a reward enough. But I got a call one day when I was doing my PhD from the World Bank, and they said, we are interested in your research, and we want you to go to India to set up a urban part of a water and sanitation program we actually have already. And I was a poor student, and a World Bank called. I had a lot of debt. I went, and that call resulted in 20 years in the World Bank, both in Washington, in Jakarta, all over Asia. A phenomenally interesting 20 years of working on poverty, working on cities, working on infrastructure. And one day, about 11 years back, my friend Andrew Steer called me and said, Ani, I've started working in WRI. I really did not know much about WRI. I knew WRI. And he said, you have to come and set up the cities program. And I said, you're crazy. I have this fantastic job at the World Bank. But you know Andrew well. He's a very persuasive guy.
Persevering.
So I came to WRI to set up the cities program. And I haven't looked back since because by the time I came to WRI, Ivan, I had already realized just working on poverty on its own was not enough. And poverty and climate change cannot be two different things we work on. These are connected issue. The development and climate change are connected issue. And WRI was a place that explored that. And Andrew was a person who explored that. So it's been an incredible 11 years for me here. And over the last 4 years, I've been the CEO. But this journey with a phenomenal team I get to work with, it's an absolute privilege. It's, only thing I want to say to your listeners is when I was growing up in this neighborhood in Delhi, I could never imagine that I would have a privilege to not only lead something like WRI, but have a President Duque as a friend. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity for me.
Well, you're too generous, Annie, and I was fascinating by listening to this story of your life, and I want to connect some dots. Um, you have a great devotion to understanding cities, how cities are planned, how can we improve life conditions in cities, and many people don't think so frequent on the role that city planning, affordable housing, and sustainable affordable housing play in climate action. And you have been a voice, but also a policy preacher on how cities can be a solution for a successful climate action. Why don't we talk about the things you learned in your previous career in academia and then the World Bank, and how you've been very positively stubborn in making WRI an organization that has specialized in the role that cities must play in order to face and defeat the climate crisis that we're suffering today in the world.
It's incredible. Cities are incredible, incredible human invention. The three simple facts about cities that I think everyone should know. First of all, most people in the world live in cities today. And as we go forward, more people will live in cities than anywhere else. So that's simple fact. And everyone, you live in Colombia, you know that, you see it around you. Every place in the world is like that. The second, the second most important thing is cities themselves produce lion's share emission in the world. Somewhere it's 60%, somewhere 70, somewhere it's actually 80%. So that's the second fact. The next two facts are actually more important. The cities actually produce most productivity in the world, most wealth of the world comes from cities. And the last fact, most innovation in the world, both product, economic, social, comes from cities. So, how we live in cities, how we manage cities, how we grow cities, how we actually consume in cities matters for the rest of the world. The climate problem or the climate path we are in cannot be solved. We cannot go to 1.5 degree or any degree if cities don't work differently. The most last fact I want to say, Ivan, is very soon most poor people in the world will live in cities. People they think that poverty is a rural problem. Actually, in Latin America and other places in the world is already shifting, but overall, globally, we will see more. So, how we actually work on cities is most incredibly important. What fascinates me, and that's why I've developed the raw, as you know, I work and the Ross Center, which is in WRI, which is the world's biggest program on cities right now. Um, what fascinates me in cities is the cities actually produce incredible social and political innovations and real solutions. Like Ciclovia, that is actually invented in Bogota, where I'm assuming you're sitting right now. This
No,
idea.
I'm actually I'm actually in a bigger one. I'm in Sao Paulo
Oh,
today.
you're in Sao Paulo right now. Okay, even one of the world's biggest cities in the world that you are actually in. But that idea that we should actually reserve roads for not cars, but for people, for biking, for health, and reduce air pollution came from Bogota. 50 years, Bogota just celebrated 50 years of cycling. Now, all over the world, that innovation is percolating everywhere. Delhi is having it, London is having it, Beijing is having it. So innovation takes place there, and that's what fascinates me. And there's so many solutions I can talk to you about that came from cities and experiments in cities that rest of the world is using.
Annie, what mistakes do you think the world has made in terms of city planning, but also when cities started to be more saturated, and then the concept of the outskirts, and then the concept of co-urban areas where we started expanding cities have affected the way in which we behave with nature and also with the environment. What mistakes can we still avoid? What lessons can we take from the way that we have planned cities in the past? And how do you think urban planning needs to change for the future?
I think, I'm a very pro city person. So
Mhm.
for me to list all the mistakes, I just want to say caveat, a lot of good things are happening in the cities across the world. That's the first thing I want to say. And my book is full of examples of what cities are doing right. But Ivan is absolutely right. There are few fundamental things we have gotten not right. And if I can broadly categorize them, one is on planning itself. We have over from 1920 onwards, when automobiles were invented, about 100 years, we have centralized automobile as as the vehicle by how we design cities. Like how can cars move? How fast can car move? We have defined efficiency of cities. How fast? I think we have to do the opposite. I think we have to prioritize how people live in cities, how people breathe in cities, how people play in cities, how people enjoy cities. Ivan, if you can close your eyes and if you think of a city that you love most, in a second you realize you're thinking of an open space where other people are around. People are maybe in a cafe or in a park or walking because we enjoy being with other places. Not you're not thinking yourselves in a car driving through a city. That's not your most favorite memory of the city. So number one, we have to design cities for people and not cars. That's a very simple thing to say, but very hard to do. Because right now most cities in the world are designed as cars, a central thing that they're trying to solve, the city planner. Number two, as you think about cities for people, you also have to think of cities for nature. And it sounds kind of corny, right? Nature, why is that important? It's important for two reasons. One, as the world heats, and we have already seen it, nature actually protects us. And we have created cities by destroying nature. There are ways to build cities that are actually with nature, with trees, with plants, with biodiversity, with butterflies. And we have seen examples after examples when they have done it. In Colombia, cities are actually reduced by 2-degree temperature, Celsius temperature, just by strategizing with plants. So that's the the second part of nature is actually even more important and more difficult. And we actually have been quite successful. Cities consume most things in the world, and that destroys far away forests. So educating cities actually shape world consumption, which is kind of hard for us to think. What we do, what we consume, the what we build, furnitures we have, actually impacts far away for it. So cities can be a really important force for far away forest protection. And cities, as you know, consume all the resources around it: water, air. How cities work with their surrounding actually creates a positive environment. Cities can be a force of positive good for the region, not just for itself. I've written extensively about how a successful region needs a successful city, and a successful city needs a successful region. The third thing I want to say, and this, Ivan, you being a president, you will appreciate very much. I feel for a long time, national governments have not really appreciated the economic engine cities are. So, for economic planning, and this is true in the country I come from, it's true for actually almost every country, have not seen city planning, how effectively cities work as an engine for their growth. S- So they have seen, industries as you forgot. So automobile, textile, but cities in the modern era, service industry is actually the most of our economy in most countries, in the most advanced countries in the world. And service economy live in cities, and those innovation is dependent on how effectively a city works. And one of the messages that I have tried in my career is to convince national government the importance of investing in cities. And often, as national government political party is different from a city government, often, not always. And that has created this kind of a friction for city and national government working together. So those are the three categories. One is planning, one is national government, and one is nature that I think is important for us to think about.
Annie, I remember that at some point when I was still in office, we launched a program with the World Economic Forum called Biodiverse Cities, which was about that connection between how cities behave, how cities consume, and how that responsibility can help us be more effective in the way we protect biodiversity. When I left office, I published a book called Our Future. You read it, you gave me a very important comment at the time. And there was this chapter that I remember we discussed, which was called Biodiverse Citizens. Because at the end, cities have citizens, and the way citizens behave impact in the way cities behave. How do you think we can effectively make citizens more aware, more responsible, but also more effective in the way they contribute collectively to have more sustainable cities? Do you think that is possible? And what has to change in order to get people more involved in climate action?
I think it's very possible, Ivan. You were ahead of your time. You were the first national leader that focused on this connection between national governments, cities, and broader nature. That how biodiversity is connected with cities. As I mentioned, cities in the world consume most, disproportionately. Okay, there's 55% of population live in cities, but they consume 85% of things. So, but at the same time, behavior shift takes place in cities fastest. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because of density, because of peer pressure, because of how government and people live so close to each other, and because of businesses. And behavior shifts actually happens, and there are many things that can happen in behavior shift. One is, of course, education. Your book is a starting point. That and the program we had put together, actually inspired by the work you've done, called Cities for Forests, that has 100 cities in it, is to educate citizens about their connectivity to nature in the city, nature just outside city, but also far away forest. So how they consume wood, for example, or what kind of furniture they buy actually impacts what forest happens or what food they eat. Whether that's deforestation free, the soybean they are consuming or their pork is consuming. Um, I think there's lots can happen starting with education, but I don't think education is enough on its own. We need to work with businesses for us to provide solutions that actually encourage. For example, businesses can provide solutions that are deforestation-free products or education on the label about where does this thing come from, so that citizens know what is that they're purchasing, what services they're purchasing. The thing that we have found most effective in this endeavor to change behavior is actually public procurement. Lot of success on how people have provided pressures on the cities about how they procure. Cities, as you know very well, governments procure a lot of things. uh, from construction to buildings to furnitures, and that has provided an incredible vehicle for education and an impact. So I feel very strongly people can do a lot, not alone, with businesses, with government, and education. And I believe even education from very young age can play a very different role about here we're talking about action, having people having a ability to do things and believing that. And I feel we're seeing a lot of change. Behavior change is a difficult thing to do, but cities have the biggest opportunity to do that.
Annie, since it's so important to double down the climate action bet today, we are also experiencing a clash in terms of emphasis, in terms of priorities, even in terms of language and narrative. And I think you've made something which is not only brave but also coherent and consistent with your line of thinking, and is publishing a new book where you talk about a new global possible, and it's about optimism in terms of climate change. And I value that you're doubling down the narrative, the bet, and you're trying also to demonstrate that a lot of things have been achieved in a positive way, even though we have not substantially been able to stabilize the temperature of our planet as we should have done many years ago. But you're saying it in a way in where you're also integrating all sectors of the economy. You're not having the yin yang controversy, but instead telling all the sectors, including the sectors difficult to abate, that they still have to contribute. And I value this book in this time. What drove you to put this emphasis now, being able to showcase all the things that you believe are working, and what lessons should people that are listening to us extract from the book to understand that we need to double down this bet. This is not ideological, this is a moral duty, and how in a practical way we should all look at the book and which examples should we embrace.
You know, I became CEO about 4 years back, a little more than 4 years back. When I became CEO, I looked around and I was trying to figure out, what's my purpose? What kind of CEO do I want to be? And I found that WRI as an organization was doing very well, quite well. And my predecessor, Andrew, was fantastic in moving WRI forward. But I also found that our community and all of us were very disappointed where we are, like how far we have come. Remember, this is 2000, it's middle of the pandemic, Glasgow 2021. I became CEO in 2021. Um, and I asked myself, in this where my organization is doing well, but the purpose why we are set up is not doing well, what should I be doing? So I ended up an exercise of asking where are we exactly in this journey of climate. I ended up speaking to more than 100 people who have been central to the climate journey over the last 30 years. You were one of them. And I appreciate your support, Ivan, in this book. And what I found is the following, that we actually have done incredible things together, things we took for granted today. The Paris Agreement, we take it for granted. It took years to build. You know that. Calderon innovated in Mexico to make NDCs a thing. Like rather than saying rich countries should tell poor countries what to do, he figured out it was a foreign affairs problem, not a climate problem. He developed this solution, and your audience would appreciate that. He said, no, we should let countries tell us what they can do, and that actually create the genesis of a successful Paris Agreement. So I have 60 stories in the book of incredible things we have done. So I came away with a very different and optimistic feeling about the moment. And I felt that I was unique in feeling that. And others, my colleagues, my peers, my friends, the whole world was not feeling that. So I wrote the book to share that optimism. And it's not blind optimism. The book is full of evidence of why. I want to point out three things why I'm optimistic. Number one is today in 2025, and this wasn't true in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was written. We actually seeing emergence of technologies needed for the transition to a safer planet, transition for a nature positive planet, transition for a planet that's good for people. That emergence of technology, you all have heard about solar and wind technology, that prices have gone down 95%. This is true across the world. But even 3 years back, we didn't realize battery technology, Ivan, would be 10 times cheaper in 3 years. We used to say 3 years back, a group of technologies that are hard to abate. You are part of this discussion yourself. Glass, cement, steel, because all these three technologies require very high heat, and people thought, oh, we can't get high heat without fossil fuel. But now people have figured it out. We actually have cement that is low carbon. We actually have steel that's emerging. So one thing I would point out, it is just the beginning. We are seeing technological changes driven by market, often supported by government. That's an incredible that we couldn't imagine that will usher in a whole different set of solutions. Number two, the book repeats many times, technology itself is not enough. We need to take technology and orchestrate change. So the change actually changing something, a economy that we have, which requires multiple puzzle pieces: the financier, the regulators, the people who will build it, the people who will use it, bringing them together. And my book is arguing it's this orchestration that we are failing. We need to not focus just on the technology, but actually orchestration of change. Why? Because the third point, only when people benefit from climate action, we get the political space to do more of it, because we need to do a lot more of it. And what I'm seeing, the third, that when we are actually using technology and orchestrating change properly across the world, we see phenomenal solutions growing like mushrooms. They're not enough. They're not in scale enough, they're not in size enough, but they are there to demonstrate, if we take technology and orchestrate change to make sure it's good for people, that it is actually happening. What we have to focus is that we need short-term gains for people so they're supported while we also achieve long-term gain. If you have give me a minute, can I share an example in what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
While writing this book, I met three women outside Nairobi, and they run a small business of macadamia nuts. These three women work with about 10,000 farmers in the vicinity, and they help them grow macadamia trees. When the trees get sick, they provide their technical assistance. Most important thing they do is, as soon as the fruits are brought there, the nuts are there, they go there, buy it, and immediately through the phone pay them immediately. Um, so 10,000 families, 50,000 people at least, are actually getting income from this. They buy the nut, bring it to outside Nairobi. They have a small factory where quite a few people work. The process is sell it to Europe and US. So not only farmers getting employment, people in the around the city getting employment from it. So there is this engine of economic growth that's taking place. What is interesting about the story is not only these people are getting employed, Ivan, but these trees are being grown in degraded land in Africa, in Kenya. Africa has two-thirds of its land that is degraded. 50% of Africa's population directly connected with land. So these trees are not only sequestering carbon, they live for 50 years, macadamia trees. Their roots are bringing water back in land that did not have water. So they're not only good for climate, they're good for nature, but they're good for people now and nature. And so this idea of short-term gains for people and long-term benefit, this is an engine of change that we need to bring. This is the thing we have to do over and over again. The final bit of the story, this three women got a small loan from a project we're involved in. That's why I know them. But now they don't need a loan from a project. They are financially viable. They actually have commercial loan. So do you see, we have created a economic engine that we need to replicate. This is the kind of solution that is people centric, nature centric, climate centric that we need to build on.
Ani, listening to you and these stories that are very touching, there's a big debate. We're weeks away from COP30, which is going to be a landmark in terms of this summits where the parts of the convention gather and discuss about the present and the future. But I think the biggest controversy is going to be global north and global south, because most of the countries in the global south that have been in a slower pace of development have also suffered from all the emissions that the global north have created over the last centuries, in which they have become economic superpowers. So the challenge for the global north is how global south is how they continue developing, and at the same time they develop in a more responsible way than the global north did for many years. However, the access to resources for the global south is quite scarce. And at the same time, people believe that the standards that have been set by the global north, when they are applied in the global south, they're going to be so costly that for many companies and even cities, the cost of adapting those criteria is going to create social clash or social turmoil. How do you think we can bridge that divide? And how can the global north behave in a way that supports development with sustainability in the global south? And let me also put it this way, and I'm going to connect this with an issue that I know you have kept close to your heart, which is the carbon market. The best way to deploy capital today for the global south, considering the fiscal limitations and the difficulty to access to loans or even philanthropic resources at the scale this requires, is by allowing to mobilize liquidity from projects in the global south that can be paid with a compensation of credits or offsets in the global north. So I want to ask about that big debate, because I know in the book you also raise examples from the global south, but we need to scale up. The fact that Africa or Latin America are required to invest more than $2 trillion in the next decade to achieve the NDCs, it's a big challenge. So I want to pick your brains on that, because I found it very fascinating, the optimism that you have in building market driven nature based solutions.
Ivan, this is a very important question, very close to my heart. So you have to give me time to answer this
Of course.
because there are three dimensions to what you're saying, and I will. One is the question of global justice. That's your first part of your question. The second is the question of trade, and the third is question of finance. So if you allow me, I would just try to respond to each one of
Of
them
course, of
because they
course.
are connected. They're absolutely connected to each other. I write in my book, The New Global Possible, there's a whole chapter on justice. And I argue that justice, the idea of justice, will be central to the discussion of climate going forward. And for too long, we have argued, that climate is about science, and I am saying that is true, but it is also about justice. And if we don't grasp the idea, and why is that important? Simply for two very simple reasons. Because as you just said, people who are suffering today because of climate change is happening everywhere, but everyone is not suffering. You and I have resources to protect ourselves. If our basement gets flooded, we have money to call the plumber. If our house gets flooded, we even have resources to move. But most people don't. A lot of poor people don't. So the people who suffer are poor people and vulnerable countries. And those same people had very little to do with why the earth is warming or having carbon dioxide there. So there's injustice between who's suffering and who's responsible. The second injustice is very inside a country. Climate change produces scarcity of water, scarcity of land. You can build your house or grow crops, scarcity of air you can breathe. Whenever there's scarcity, our history shows, the history of a civilization, poor people suffer most. So, whatever we do, climate change will actually make poor people's life worse, not the richest people in the world. And that's the unfortunate truth. So, there is a moral argument why we need to take action on climate. But in my book, I actually don't make the moral argument because people have made the moral argument over, and I believe that's true. I make an argument that if we don't do this, it's our self interest. If you're a rich country in North, is your self interest to make sure people in the global South don't suffer because migration already has become an immensely, this year's elections, if you look at, migration is a top issue, and this will already increase. There are wars going on right now that is because of water scarcity between countries. Inside countries, there's unrest all over in Middle East because of water. What's happening in some of the countries? So if you do not look at this as a social cohesion, stability, and migration. You have to invest to protect yourself, which is a terrible way to present it. But if you don't do it, the cost, the future cost, will be even higher. That's what I'm trying to argue, that the investment on adaptation, investment on resilience, investment on building capacity is a much lower investment than the cost it'll take once the disaster takes place. Is 1 to 30 difference. So that's the question of why we need to take action here, to self-preserve, and also because of moral reason, both economic reason as well as moral reason. The question then becomes, all right, this is happening. What should countries in the global south do? And you talked about trade, meaning how rules have been set up. I think a lot of rules have been set up that are unilateral, set up by one country for many countries. I see emergence of a lot of bilateral trade agreements that is taking place. Actually, the current environment that the United States has created a tariff actually increasing that bilateral agreement. You've seen it, I've seen it. And I want to share with your audience one very incredible example, because you said you were in Sao Paulo. Brazil is the world's largest producer of soybean by far. Yeah, United States is a close second, but Brazil is by far the largest producer. And soybean production or any commodity production directly correlated with loss of nature, loss of forest, virgin forest. And this is a very established science. And China is one of the world's largest buyer of soybean in the world by far, like importer. So one of the initiative that is going on right now between China and Brazil is to see if China could buy deforestation free soy from Brazil. Incredibly interesting development that both countries are trying to work together. Imagine if that happened, Ivan. Imagine if these two countries agreed that we will support you to figure out how to deforestation free. We'll only buy deforested soy. It will change soy trade all over the world because they are such dominant players. These are the kind of things that will happen that provides us a path towards not only trade but green trade that is good for nature, good for climate. The last question you asked about is about finance. I the science shows, and your audience most probably know, that the countries that are most important that have to um, transition are countries in the global south, because global north countries actually have resources to transition. Global south, as you pointed out, has led more than $2 trillion gap between what they need. So finance has to come. And over the last year, the finance that is on in grants and loans actually has diminished. Grants number has diminished. Finance that comes from development aid for countries that give development aid, or the World Bank, or IDB, or Asian Development Bank. The grant part of it actually has come down, which is a very, very difficult thing for global South countries. But however, whatever the number is of grants and loans, it is nowhere close to closing the $2 trillion gap. Nowhere. So what is private capital and private capital has not flowed to global south. 3% of global private capital went to Africa, which has the most solar potential in the world. The interesting thing is here is that is actually India, Ivan. India is an outlier in being able to attract private capital in their energy transition. Outlier in the same income group. No other country has been able to do what India. So I looked into that closely. And what I found is India has done three things that make them attractive. India doesn't have a policy environment that is dramatically more different than other similar countries. India has put together a clear long-term goal of 500 gigawatts of renewable. It put together financial instruments with their banks to attract private capital. And it actually invested their own capital, public capital, in that sector. These three things together created a environment of risk, lowering of risk for private capital. So private capital flow actually doubled over the last few years. So what I'm saying is we cannot just wait for rich countries to provide more capital. They should, but their capital actually going down. We need our global south countries to actually think together how to leverage the capital they have. And that's why I like this idea of country platforms. Colombia has set up a country platform, Brazil has set up a country platform. How to mix different capital to reduce the risk of private capital flowing. I feel private capital flow will become the singular critical fact for the transition to succeed. Sorry for the
Well,
long
that's
answer.
no. Not only I don't think it's long. I think it's very profound, and that also takes me, Annie, because I know we're running out of time, to my last two questions. This one is it's something that I at least it keeps me up awake at night, and it's all this AI revolution that we're seeing, which is fabulous. I'm optimistic about it, although we have to be cautious on some things. But I think I'm optimistic. Has an impact in energy consumption, big impact. And I am starting to see some kind of a deacceleration of the energy transition in other countries in order to keep the supply of traditional energy for that AI transformation. Obviously, we're just in a starting point, although we have seen a lot of things happening in the last 3 years, but this is only going to be more exponential as the time goes by. And my question is, do you have the same sensation? And if you have that sensation, how do you think we have to act in a responsible way in order to diversify the matrix, not make ideological the idea of the supply of oil and gas, but also for that sector which is very difficult, if not impossible to abate, to think about geological net zeroing, thinking about other kinds of solutions, because I don't think this energy demand is going to stop. And I think the pace of demand is going to be faster than the energy transition. So how can we adapt to this? Or do you think we can be a little bit pessimistic or realistic? How would you judge that thing going on? And I also want to know if it keeps you up awake at night.
I think three very different things are happening at the same time. First thing I'm going to say, where we find ourselves before the AI revolution even started. Um, um, Ivan, we are in the middle, all of us, in the middle of a economy that is 200 years old. A hydrocarbon economy that started with coal, then to oil and gas. It's about 200 years old. And this 200 years economy has been immensely successful. The human progress, not evenly distributed in the world, human progress has been the most in this 200 years in our 10,000 years of history of a civilization. Poverty reduction, income growth, health growth, everything you can see. Again, I repeat, not evenly distributed. What does that mean? Which means that this economy, the hydrocarbons is everywhere in the economy. It's not just how we drive our cars or how we create electricity. The shampoo we use, the plastic bottle, was made from a derivative of hydrocarbon. What we eat, The fertilizer was created from hydrocarbon. So we are in the beginning, Ivan, of a economic transition that will take every part of the economy, and we are just the beginning of it. And when we signed Paris Agreement, we thought we were signing a climate agreement. And I have written in the book, and I've said this many times, we didn't realize we are signing an economic transition agreement. And no one realized the scope of it, the scope of what we were signing. So the fact that we are actually seeing a massive backlash right now, I think I'm disappointed. I'm sure you're disappointed. I'm sure all of us who work on this is disappointed. But we can't be surprised. We can't be surprised that incumbent of this if this economy, people who benefit and run this economy today, they're not just going to pack up and leave. We need to bring them along. And I don't think we have done a supreme job. Some are coming along, as you know, you work with those businesses, I work with those businesses, but not all. So that fact that there is a backlash of a very organized, very well funded, very successful part of the economy should not be surprising to us, and we should be ready for it. That's important to remember. The second, I think we also are seeing incredible progress in AI. There's enough written about whether it's going to be good for us or bad for us. I don't have a view yet. It's too new. I know for one thing, I want to figure out, I've told on my board and WRI, only thing I want to work on is how AI can be good for people. Let other people work on what the risks are. Because I can see a lot of benefit from and AI in the United States has increased its demand for electricity. Electricity demand is growing up all over the world. In India, in Indonesia, in China, just simply because we're electrifying more things. We're electrifying transport, we're electrifying manufacturing, air conditioning use is going up as income is going on in India and Indonesia and all over Latin America. So it's very unusual for a rich country like United States to have demand increase. That's why it's such a big news. Um, and of course, we all need to figure out how to produce this. I think there are a lot of innovative solutions. I'm optimistic if we do the right policy of actually leveraging the existing system, interconnectivity, using the grid properly, adding all kinds of um, new supply from solar, wind, geospatial. I think there'll be some gas investment to make it firm, but we need to be agnostic to technology and see how we can get lowest cost and most energy there. But what's happening right now, in at least the country I live, the United States, is the first thing that I just said, the pushback of the fossil fuel is interacting with this particular demand curve. And we don't have very good policies in the United States right now, not at all. Uh, I don't think it'll last, to be honest, because it doesn't make economic sense. Um, However, that is the case right now. I want to repeat, though, I've repeated in the book, I've written in the book, that is not the case, Ivan, all over the world. And that is important to remember. There are only three regions in the world, North America, Gulf states, and Russia, that have long term oil and gas reserves. Rest of the world don't. So China, India, South Africa, Brazil, they're not trying to figure out how to do more oil and gas. They're trying to figure out how to get more renewable faster because their energy security is dependent on that. And Colombia has taken a courageous decision away from fossil fuel. Um, so I think we need to look at the world and not just one country. I'm optimistic that economic sense will prevail and not ideological sense of how energy should be run.
Ani, I just want to finalize with one question. Obviously, we could stay for hours and hours because you have so many things to say, and I value how constructive, how optimistic, but also how you have expressed empathy with different parts of the world that are making big efforts. What do you think is the great definition of success for COP30 few weeks from now? How would you define success in a COP30 where the U.S. is no longer part of the Paris Agreement again? but still, U.S. it's a champion in terms of energy efficiency and carbon efficiency, and uh, it's literally making a revolution, maybe silent. But how would you define success?
You know, Ivan, I am. This is a very important COP. For all COPs are important. This COP is very important simply because where we find ourselves in the world, um, of fractures that has taken place during the last year, of many different, not only on tariff discussion that goes on, but wars that are going on. So the first most important thing that needs to happen, I think, and Brazil should get a lot of credit for the effort they're putting in and what Andre de la Correa is putting in, what his team is putting in, is for the world to come together on climate. That's the first most important thing that needs to happen. And I think we will succeed on that, that the world will come together because with or without United States, that world sees how important this is. That's number one. Number two, this is the year countries supposed to come back and provide higher ambition to meet the goal of climate goal that this global stock take in Dubai showed. We will see what countries do. So far, it seems to us that it would not add up to the ambition we require. But it's not there yet. Countries are supposed to come back. We will see surprises. There is a big meeting coming up actually next week in New York when the Secretary General has asked countries to come and present their. We look forward to that. So that is the second thing. The two other things that are very important that Brazil is trying to achieve, three other things, I think. One is Brazil is trying to make a big push, and that absolutely needs to happen on adaptation and resilience. So we will see if the adaptation investment, because when in Baku people agreed to $1.3 trillion, there was no delineation for adaptation. And as you know, world across the world, climate-related disaster just increasing exponentially. People are suffering. So that fund, adaptation fund, is a very, very important. Brazil also is making and you're part of it, and making a really concerted effort to think about finance in a more systematic way, the way I just talked about, not just how much money North will give South, but what kind of financial instruments can we create to provide long term. Brazil is trying to put together a funding for long term funding called TIFF, FFF. Um, that is a fund they're trying to create for long-term sustainable funding for forests, for tropical forests across the world. And the last thing that I'm very excited about that I'm going to be part of, I'm going to be part of a lot of these things, is they're trying to see how cities and local government can be part and parcel of NDCs or national commitments. So lots to look forward to. And actually, historically, Ivan, even with difficult moments, countries actually have come together on climate, and actually found a even middle of a pandemic. Remember in Glasgow, it was literally middle of pandemic, and 30,000 40,000 people came there because they wanted to show their solidarity. I hope to see the same in Berlin. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I think we're all very optimistic. Ani, it has been such a pleasure
Thank you, Ivan.
to talk to you. And again, congratulations for the book. We look forward to see a Spanish edition pretty soon. And we want you to come to Colombia also more frequently, so that we can keep having this amazing conversation. Thank you for being such a voice, such a leader on these topics. And once again, Annie, thank you for being in Tres Respuestas.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to being with you in Colombia. Thank you very much, Ivan.